Hello, and welcome to Community Thinkers, a broadcast mini-series from the Summit Hill Association. Thanks for joining us. We're listening to the birds. In this series, we hear from one of St. Paul's most thoughtful people about issues that matter to our neighbors here in Summit Hill and to all of St. Paul. I'm Sherry Johnson. I'm a process guide, inclusion trainer, and complexity coach. I'm also a board member here at the Summit Hill Association.
And I'm Monica Haas. I'm the Executive Director of the Summit Hill Association, and I'm your go-to gal for information and connection. You might be asking yourself, what is Community Thinkers? We're hosting this series to engage our community as we renew our neighborhood plan. We're finding that the more we learn about planning, sustainability, racial equity, and economic development, the more we realize how much more there is to learn.
Yeah, and this show is for you. So after I get things started, we'll turn to the chat where Monica will share your questions with our guest. So before we learn from today's community thinker, we invite you to practice that. Start commenting now in the thread below. We'd love to hear even what brought you here today. But without further ado, the community thinker we've asked to join us today is Sam Buffington. He is a community organizer with Springboard for the Arts. Before that, he worked for Frogtown Neighborhood Association for almost 10 years, where he helped that district council innovate, influence, and better represent all its residents. We'll talk about arts engagement and what it takes to create a sense of place. Welcome, Sam.
Thank you. I just wanted to say, first off, that I am coming to you live from my grandma's office here in Tucson, Arizona. So there is a little bit of a lag. I'm sorry about that. And there are a few background noises that you might catch every once in a while that I can't control, like the bird clock. So I hope you enjoy it. Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be part of this.
So we're going to do a little bit of a 2-second lag between the two of us. You'll notice that, listeners, just bear with us because we still want to make this work, even from grandma's basement. That's great, Sam. So Sam, tell us about your personal history with St. Paul and what drew you to this work.
Yeah, so I moved to St. Paul in 2004 after I finished college in Ohio, and I moved in with my brother, and we both worked at Axeman Surplus in the Midway area of St. Paul. And I was also doing work with an organization called the League of Young Voters Education Fund. And so we were an organization that worked with young people, a nonpartisan voter education and engagement organization, but we used hip hop and hip hop culture to connect to young people and encourage them to vote and to be educated as they voted. So I did that work for a few years. That led me to working or starting an apprenticeship with the Organizing Apprenticeship Project, which is now Voices for Racial Justice. And they placed me for 6 months with the Alliance for Metropolitan Stability. And this was during the kind of early stages of light rail engagement and organizing. So I did some work there. From there, went to Westside Community Organization and worked for that district council for a couple of years, and then moved over to the Frogtown Neighborhood Association, where I worked for a long time. And there, during the actual construction of the Green Line, Frogtown Neighborhood Association partnered with Springboard for the Arts on the Irrigate project, which was, doing tons of small placemaking projects up and down the corridor. And that was really eye-opening for us as Frogtown Neighborhood Association, and really changed the way that we worked to do more work with artists and do more work through, kind of culture bearers and artists. And it was really successful. And so that was great. Did that for many years. And then when it was time to move on, I started working at Springboard, and I've been there for about 3 years now. So I currently live in Minneapolis, but I've always, since 2004, I have worked in St. Paul.
That is wonderful. I know about so many of those projects and have followed so much of that. You're threaded through a lot of the most exciting what we call placemaking and arts stuff that I've heard about in St. Paul. As we are working on our updated neighborhood plan, we keep hearing about creative placemaking. What does that mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so, as a term, it means different things to different people. So I think for a lot of like city planner types, for, community developers, it often is about like physical space. And so, it's like, is there a little plaza where people can gather? Is it walkable? Are there, kind of artistic amenities, maybe like those, like bike racks that are shaped like butterflies or something like that, right? So it can be like those kinds of things. And it is that. But at Springboard, we really focus on people and those relationships. And I think, so for us, that idea of creative placemaking is that thing that takes something from a house to a home, that, where you really start seeing like, this is how you connect people, and it starts seeing the uniqueness of a space. And there's a lot of ways to do that. But it is much more relational. And so that might be something that is like permanent or semi-permanent, or it might be something that is like, just takes a moment, or something that happens in just a moment. And when you're thinking about, walking down the street, and maybe you look over and you see someone doing a poetry reading in front of a business, and then you remember that, right? Like that becomes a memory of that space. And so that memory is long lasting, even if the event or the piece itself was something that took place in a moment. So, that's really what we like to think about, and, encourage people to think about in creative placemaking, is that, what makes your neighborhood unique, what makes the businesses and the people unique, finding local artists to do this, like who are the people from here that are going to represent this neighborhood, and then knowing that things can be as small or as large as they need to be to do the work, and really thinking about those connections to people.
A few weeks back, I was talking to Merritt Clapp-Smith, who had a long history of doing planning in Summit Hill. And she talked about this culture of Summit Hill sort of slowly receding from that public square and public space, whether it's green space or placemaking or the streetscape. And so when we think about a neighborhood like Summit Hill, where people have sort of gotten more and more private over time, or East Grand Avenue, what opportunities might we have to explore creative placemaking in the way you describe it?
Yeah. So one thing that we really believe at Springboard is that, we define art and artists as anybody who says that they are an artist. And so that could be, you sing in your church choir, you knit, or you could have pieces in a museum, right? And when you think about it that way, then you have and we also believe that artists are assets, right? That they're real assets to your community. And when you think about it that way, then you have assets on every block, in every business. And so when you try to draw from that pool, you're drawing from the richness and that tapestry of your community, and people are going to be drawn to that, right? And so you just need to find a way to pull that out from those places and put them in a public space where people can then engage with it. And I think one of the ways that we found that just works, that is really successful, is, you think about lots of little, right? And so that model for us is it's what we did with Irrigate. We've done it in other projects and in other ways, but you say, okay, we have $10,000 to do community engagement or to do public art, and rather than paying one artist $10,000 to do one piece or one event, you pay 10 artists $1,000, or you pay 20 artists $500 to do small little things throughout the community, right? And that one, it builds momentum, but you also start identifying new artists, people who maybe hadn't thought that they could do a project like this, and all of a sudden are like excited. But also each one of those artists brings their people in, right? And so, and starts building that. So like their neighbors come out to see, their friend who plays guitar go playing in the park and doing a little concert in the park. And then those people and then whoever happened to walk by see it, and then that starts building that feeling of like, oh, we could be outside, and this neighborhood has a unique flavor, and it has its, it has something that draws it and kind of builds that fabric. We think a lot of like this kind of creative placemaking is having three kind of big outputs or outcomes, I guess. And so, and one of those is to like kind of change and or enhance the narrative of your community, right? So in a really obvious way, thinking about the Irrigate project on the Green Line, at that time, all of the news was just talking about all of the construction that was happening, right? And there was no place to park, and all the businesses were going to go out of business, and it was a disaster, and you should stay away at all costs. And by having a whole bunch of projects that happened over those 3 years in these so it was performances in restaurants, it was, art on the sidewalk, it was, puppetry in Lower Town, like all of these different kinds of things happened all up and down the corridor. And some of them were great, and some of them were weird, and some of them were great and weird, and some of them were super successful and brought tons of people out, and some of them hardly anybody showed up, and maybe no one remembers that it even happened. But like over that course, the dialogue became about all of the cool, interesting stuff that was happening on University Avenue, not about just the awfulness of the construction and all of the despair there, right? And so I think that like in a place like any neighborhood, right, that like you want people to come out, then like these are all the cool things that like make up this neighborhood, and there's all these people who do all of this cool work, and all of these like unique businesses that we should go check out, and you start building that momentum, and you can do it with a lot of little things, and that's actually going to get you further than like one big bronze statue or mural or anything else, no matter how great that statue is.
I'm reminded of just recently there was a slice of dulce de leche, cake in front of Cafe Latte, and people went nuts over it. Or like this ice sculpture on Summit Hill or on Summit Avenue. People absolutely adored it and were really angry when the city made them take it down. So that's really echoing, I think, a lot of what we're seeing, that these little experiments of art that kind of start creating a sense of place. That's really cool. What kind of mindset do residents and business owners need to have as we start to approach that kind of work?
Yeah, I mean, I think as I was thinking about that question, the words that kind of came to my mind were like a sense of play, a sense of innovation, of experimentation, and openness. And I think that that's where, again, like this lots of little model, not to beat it over the over the head, but like it is really helpful because, it doesn't have to be perfect. Your investment is in any individual project isn't so huge that if it doesn't quite work, or if it's a little off, or if it bothers a few people, that has like taken up your whole budget and like become the whole thing, right? It allows for, a lot of different ways for people to engage and be in process, and for, the artists to be more creative, but also to kind of throw a bunch of stuff and see what sticks, and see what are those things that maybe you want to continue working with. And so I really think, like often, and not just like residents and business owners, but even when we're working with, city planners or those kind of things, that like there's such a feeling of like, this needs to be really like well planned and well executed, and there needs to be tons of notice for each of like artistic thing that happens, and we need to make sure that we get it in the paper, and that, like all of these things. And that's great, and sometimes that works, but also sometimes that takes away from the like spontaneity and the magic and the like uniqueness of it. And that you can do that when you have a $500 project, but when you have a $10,000 project, it's much harder to like let that stuff go and just kind of let things happen. Yeah, and I think also just understanding that, art and creative practice, like all of it isn't going to be for everybody. And so, there's going to be some times that something comes up and maybe you don't like the way that, that that event happened or like looked, or maybe, that mural isn't quite the thing that you would want to see put up there, but that, if you get this, like a bunch of stuff, then some of it really will be. And that even things that like, that even ugly things in some ways, or things that aren't as appealing, can also help like create a character for a place, and that can become like kind of ingrained in like, this is the, that's that funny mural that we've got that the hand is all wrong or whatever, and it becomes a kind of a, still it's a touch point for the neighborhood.
It reminds me kind of like you start to find a group identity, and there's something for everyone. And even the things that even the things that might be, as you say, ugly, sort of become a shared story, right? That it might be ugly, but it's our ugly, right? So I want to switch gears just for a minute. Exactly. I want to switch gears for a minute and ask about, we understand artists have been particularly hard hit by the pandemic. And I know a lot of folks were excited about Springboard's Personal Emergency Relief Fund and some of the other efforts by Springboard. And your COVID response was one of the best in the Metro. And so as we emerge from this time, what reflections might you have had on the role of art in communities in crisis?
I mean, I think that art in times of crisis is huge. And I think that, often we tend to think of art and artists as like add-ons to a project, or to as the bells and whistles of our society, and kind of can fail to see the how deeply woven art and culture is into how we respond to things. And so I do think that, having artists to help convey information, to interpret information, to help people think and process difficult conversations or hard times, that, that kind of creative mind and that questioning mind of how we are going to move forward from turbulent times, and how we like survive in turbulent times. And I think, and again, that doesn't just mean the biggest, fanciest artists, right? Like that includes people who are doing little things in their garage. That includes people who have, their garage band, or their, do watercolors of animals, like all of those folks like have something to add. And that creative thinking, I think, is integral. And that asking of weird questions, and not just accepting that like, this is how we've done it and that's how we're going to do it. And just how important for mental health things can be. We ran a program called Artists Respond to combating social isolation, and asked artists to, again, do these small projects, but kind of targeting folks who were living in extreme isolation for one reason or another. So that, it could have been, in some cases, that was people in nursing homes or care facilities. In some cases, that was, the rural queer community. And so to do these projects that helped reach out and connect people, and just the number of people that we heard from, both who like experienced that art, and then also from the artists themselves, about how healing and how, helpful those things were, and how to, and how that can help build community, I think is really important. And I think that in times where it's easy to get really divided over like issues, there are things that artists can help bring out that help, reshape conversations, or just like help break us out of the like kind of binary of like, this is what my position on whatever is. And I'll just use one quick example, but we have an office in Fergus Falls. We do a lot of rural work, and in Fergus Falls, there's a big old, now abandoned mental health facility called the Kirkbride. And, that whether to preserve that or tear that down was this huge divisive issue in the community. And there was like people on both sides, and this kind of like huge battle was being waged, in city council meetings and in, the opinion pieces in the newspaper. An artist came in and just, one artist who eventually ended up working for us for a while. But she created this big chalkboard that was the, shape of the Kirkbride, which is a very like recognizable shape, and just wrote what else is possible, or what is possible, and had people like write on it. And all of a sudden, instead of it being like, yes, I'm in favor of this, or no, I'm against it, it was like, here are ideas. And then from there, we can build ideas, and we don't have to just be like, I am the pro tear down or pro preserve, right? That there's like all of this stuff in between, and kind of help heal that, like help have that conversation in a different kind of way. So I think that those are the things that are really important for artists.
What you've reminded me of as having been a theater teacher is how art can serve as that sort of third way thinking. So thank you for that. I think we all need a little bit more of that right now. So our last question we like to ask, but for every guest, is if you could snap your fingers and have your wish be granted, what role do you hope that district councils might play in helping shape an environment where art and artists can thrive?
I mean, I think my main thing would be is to include artists and have artists help lead the process, right? To move from artists as the add-on and art as the add-on to things, to have them kind of art and artists to be kind of central to the decision making and the working and the planning and the thinking, and that like you really want that in there. And I think that that will not only benefit artists, but also the community as a whole. And then I also think to understand that, art is work, and it takes time, and it takes skill, and it takes resources. And I think more than any other group, artists are asked to work for free or for the exposure or, to benefit the community. And, sometimes that is great, and that's what needs to happen. But also just keep in mind that, like, if you're gonna, you might be willing to pay a consultant to do something that you could also pay that artist to do it, and to be thinking about, how you use art and culture to do the like main tasks of connecting to community and building relationships and building power. So.
Awesome. Monica, I'm going to call you back and just have you join me in asking any further questions you're either seeing in Facebook or that you've heard folks asking you over the phone. Yeah, what other questions are out there?
So I am not seeing any questions in the chat as of yet. So if you have a question, please feel free to write it in the chat and we will answer it as best we can. Sam, one thing I'm thinking of, so much about Summit Hill is about the historic character and the building of St. Paul and how it became to be what it is today. Being one of the oldest and most historic neighborhoods is really important to residents here. How do you see public art fitting into that to kind of pay homage to that history?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I have kind of two answers to that. So one is I think that art is a great way to tell stories, right? And especially if you're thinking about art not only as big public visual art, but as that but as theater art, as music, as that there's ways to kind of bring that character out and have those stories tell, kind of also maybe less heard stories of that process, right? So I think that there's like a lot of ways to do that, and ways that artists can uplift those things. And how do you take, like how do you think about the different ways of telling the same history, right? But I would also say that, when you're thinking about neighborhoods, and that it's also important to be thinking about who's here now, right? And that like there are these great buildings, and who is like, what has that history brought, and who are the people that have like come together around that, and how is that connected to the deeper history of St. Paul and what that is. And so to not be afraid to also see things like from a current perspective, right? Not to just like solely be like, we are a historic neighborhood, but there were also like, yes, you are. And that's an amazing thing. And that is something that is like a defining characteristic of the neighborhood, but you're also a contemporary neighborhood with amazing people who are doing cool stuff. And so to not be afraid to highlight that stuff as well.
I really like that. Thank you. Kasim asked a question here. I remember briefly the ice sculpture by an anonymous artist near Summit. Why was it taken down, and how can we preserve creativity in our communities amidst policy?
I don't know specifically about that particular piece. But one thing that I would say is just also not to be afraid of temporary things, and that like to remember that like just seeing that ice sculpture, created that memory in you and made you see that place differently and think about the neighborhood differently, and that's part of the magic of creative placemaking and of the work is are you creating new memories and new feelings about spaces, right? And so I can't speak directly to that ice sculpture, but I think that idea of things not always being permanent, but still really valuable, and that they do create lasting effects.
So as kind of a follow-up, Bethany says, St. Paul has been criticized for permitting and regulations getting in the way. How do we make those easier for artists?
Well, believe it or not, St. Paul is a lot better than other cities that I've worked in, especially Minneapolis is notoriously hard to get stuff done in. But I do think that again, like an openness to things, I think, and there's an added element for you all of like historic buildings, that it's even harder to put public art and things on historic buildings. But I do think that, both, I think one thing is also like encouraging artists and allowing for artists to think of their work not necessarily in the most simple public art kinds of ways, like murals or sculptures or like kind of permanently affixed things, but that in this kind of like temporary vein, in something that happens a few times in a vacant lot, or a paint the pavement kind of thing, or those kinds of things, where it doesn't always have to be this big permanent thing. And then I also think getting the city involved in your project early, and ideas, then there's always seems to be ways to get around whatever the regulation is if you work on it early.
That's probably a whole set of expertise that artists and places like Springboard have is how to go around things that need to be gotten around. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Monica, do you have anything else that you're hearing from the community or the board or Facebook?
No, please enter your questions as you have them. One thing, Sam, that we've seen a lot of is after the murder of George Floyd, a lot of public art kind of happening quickly as businesses boarded up their businesses for safety. And now that's all being memorialized. How do you feel about political, maybe more controversial art in public spaces?
I mean, I think it's vital and really important for people to see that, and I think it allows people to see, you know, some of what's really happening, and brings out those voices in community that might not always be heard, especially in public art. You know, that doing big public art projects is a pretty exclusive thing, you know, and that you have to have done a bunch of like big public art projects in order to get a big public art project. And so I do think that one of the things that that all of that art did was really like just it created tons of canvas, right? Or in this case, plywood, but for, you know, where people were allowed to like work on, and again, that kind of the fact that it was like somewhat impermanent, you know, allowed for that to just kind of flourish and happen. And, you know, they're going to come down, and some of them are like amazing pieces that are going to be memorialized, and some of them probably not so much. But I do think, you know, what you saw was the feeling of so many people in this community, and so many of the, you know, particularly Black artists and artists of color, like really got like highlighted for the first time in this like really in your face kind of way. And I think that, you know, whether you like the message or not, I think that that is like important for people to see.
Thank you. So Bethany asks, how could arts help revitalize Grand Avenue?
Yeah, I mean, I think that like that's like, I think in a million different ways, right? I think, you know, everything from, so I think that, you know, in a place like Grand Avenue, you've got all of these like amazing, unique businesses. You've got this like, you know, kind of beautiful street. There's all of this opportunity, and getting people when they come to not just like, oh, I'm going to go to Cafe Latte, or I'm going to go to this like one place, but like, I'm going to come to Grand Avenue and, you know, experience that. And I think that, you know, that's kind of the heart of this creative placemaking, right? And that, again, you can do that through both like kind of beautification things, right? Like mosaic planters or, you know, that kind of thing. But also, you know, some of the coolest projects that we had for Irrigate, for example, where there was a group called Happy Frog Town, which was Tyler Olson, who's, you know, and they had this like theater group, and they started doing, you know, kind of cabarets in a Vietnamese restaurant, and you know, would bring all of their people who are connected to their organization from all over the place, like coming down and seeing their shows like in this business. And all of a sudden that business was like, oh, wow, like, well, we have events that brings people in and new customers. And all of a sudden those people were like, oh, there's really good Vietnamese food in St. Paul. Maybe I should, you know, leave my home in Vandus Heights to come down and check that out. And so, you know, that I think that like those kinds of things, but also when you just have that like sense of like, there's stuff happening, right? It's not just a place to go buy stuff, but it's a place to like experience, right? And that can be these big complicated things, but it can also just be a lot of like little fun stuff popping up and happening. And the more of that that's happening, and the more authentic that is, so like authentic to the place, so you're using the local folks, like you're gonna build on that, and there's gonna be a place that people want to come and check out.
Great. Libby would like to know if she could find better ways for collaboration between community gardens and artists.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, I think that's, just like doing stuff that brings people together. And again, maybe it's like, if you could even, if you're thinking about the community gardens, right? Like, well, maybe we'll get together a pretty small amount of money, $2,000, $5,000, and do a small call for artists to do little things in their, in the garden space, right? And then that starts building those relationships between the people who are working in the garden and the artists. We at Springboard think of gardeners as artists, so there can, you might see some overlap there. But yeah, just saying like, hey, we have this, like, and sometimes even saying like, we have space, right? Like if you have small sculptures and you would like to put your small sculptures in the garden, we can work with you on that. Anything like that, I think is an interesting way. And I think that is a real, you will see a lot of overlap and a lot of people excited to work with each other.
I'm glad you see gardeners as artists, because I think the same thing. I love our garden at Linwood. It's really, really unique and super special to the neighborhood. Cassim would also like to ask, for our most vulnerable population, including minorities, are there creative platforms that allows expression during such isolation without cost?
Yeah, I mean, so there are, specific organizations, like cultural organizations that include like Black Table Arts, and the Center for Hmong Arts and Talent, who, kind of help provide opportunities for artists of color and BIPOC artists. I know there are some for LGBTQI artists as well. But I also think that, like, one of the kind of nice things about where we are at these days is that there are a lot of opportunities to get your art and your message out there via social media, via, things like YouTube, but also just getting out and doing it, and kind of, kind of finding those places where you can be out in the public realm and sharing your work. I think if I would need to think a little bit more about, and more specifically, like if you have a specific kind of platform that you're looking for or something like that, you can always feel free to connect with us at Springboard, and we can kind of help make that connection. But yeah, I mean, I do think that there's kind of more opportunity now to get your work out. But there are like also kind of more formal networks that can help with that.
Great, thanks, Sam. Sherry, do you have any further questions?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I was noticing that, kind of building on the last question, I noticed the other day that Springboard announced that they're a member of this new economy coalition for guaranteed income for artists. I don't know, can you talk at all about that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so the city of St. Paul and Mayor Carter is part of this larger group, national group called Mayors for Guaranteed Income. And so they're doing a whole bunch of these pilots. St. Paul's doing a pilot where they're paying people $500 a month for 18 months. And they're kind of studying with no strings attached, right? And they're studying what people do with that money, how it helps, how it changes people's lives, as part of this bigger idea of guaranteed basic income. And so we wanted to make sure that artists don't get left out of that conversation. And also just felt like it would be, really interesting to see what could happen. And so we raised additional funds and are partnering with the city to provide this kind of same stipend to 25 artists in the Frogtown, Rondo, a little bit of the North End area. So these were all artists that were selected at random out of people who had applied to our emergency relief fund from those zip codes. And so we have, we'll be announcing soon like who those artists are, and then they'll get $500 a month for 18 months, and we're going to be have the same people like doing the research end on that and just kind of seeing where that goes and where that ends up.
That is awesome. So that kind of brings us to our featured nonprofit part of the show. It's something we do every show is honor our local nonprofit community by sharing organizations that our listeners can contribute to as they're able. So since Sam does work for Springboard, and we've talked a lot about some of what they do, Sam, is there anything that we missed that you'd love to talk about with regard to Springboard? And we're going to put Springboard's link in chat too, so you can donate. But yeah.
I mean, just two things I'd like to kind of quickly mention is, the emergency relief fund was something that we had done for years, but then obviously really blew up during COVID and when so many artists were out of work or unable to practice. And so that is, people can apply. It's a really simple process, and they get, $500 just to deal with the emergency. And so, we went from doing like $10,000 a year worth of that to multiple millions of dollars going out to that. And I forget the number, but it was, thousands and thousands of artists that we helped with that. So that was exciting. And it's on pause right now as we kind of like recalibrate, but it will be coming back. Sorry, my grandma's phone is ringing. Sorry about that, guys. But then also there's we do a lot of just work with artists on more of like the business side of art. So we have like a work of art series that people can do that's free, that offers through the library and also online. That is like how to do your taxes, how to time management, pricing, like those kinds of things for artists. We do career consultations. We have a whole roster of professional artists who people can get a consult from, and then we continue to do work locally and nationally, like around this idea of placemaking and building community. So
awesome. Sam, anything else you'd like to share with our viewers about Springboard or placemaking or what you're working on right now?
No, just that we're always love to do stuff with folks, especially in St. Paul. And so if you have questions or if you're an artist that needs some help, connect to us and we'll be happy to work with you. So, thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. We loved having you. And so we've come to the end of our learning journey again here at Summit Hills Community Thinkers. Please do share this show on Facebook, like this page to keep up with more content. Monica, share about our next guest.
Yes, next Friday at noon, we'll be talking about the St. Paul Planning Commission with the wonderful Commissioner Wendy Underwood. She will tell us all things St. Paul planning, which is great. Also, please plan to attend our SHA's April 22nd online meeting where we'll share what we've learned from the community so far in regards to our neighborhood plan.
Awesome. Bye, everybody. And thanks again, Sam. Take care. Have a great weekend.
Yeah, thank you.